Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Your Excellency. Thank you. And honored to share the stage with John, who, as you can see, is a fully accredited member of the intelligentsia in Europe, which is a breath of fresh air, I can tell you that. And Kathy, who's been in so many of these battles. I have the privilege on frequent occasion of having great conversations with John about all these things. And I agree with him, this conversation is fundamental amongst yourselves, but also across generations. You can easily see the demographic that is going to be with us on this. Okay, you have to reach out to that other demographic that is not with you. John is right that there is a process of deconstruction going on and redefinition in our current democracy. And we chose the titles for these conferences not really by accident. We really mean that there is a crisis in democracy. The problem of abortion on demand is a symptom that has arrived. But the problem of the philosophical radical shift in our understanding of government, of constitutions, of democracy, has been going on for a long time in Europe. And certainly it's coming to Ireland at a very rapid pace as of recent. So I want to try to amplify a little bit where these problems are being played, because they're being played in actual political, cultural environments. That is to say, you're a republic, but of a democratic type. So it's very important to understand that this is being played out in the political, cultural level. This is not a battle for NGOs versus political parties who are trying to radically shift your national consensus, your understanding of a constitution, your understanding of what a fundamental right is. This is a national issue. As far as I'm concerned, from the outside, it's fighting for the soul of your country, for your national consensus, which is enshrined in your constitution. Abortion is part of the problem, but it won't be the only problem. It is not possible to fight these battles and throw out there small intermediary structures, such as NGOs, to fight a national cultural problem. There are national institutions that exist in a democracy, intermediary institutions, who are guardians of the common good. These days we speak of the common good and we often think of healthcare, welfare of all types, education, jobs. But a crucial part of the common good was always classically understood as the right and the duty, or the right of the citizens to receive a moral and spiritual education, the ability to know that which is true. And that was being fulfilled principally by national institutions such as the church. The guarding and being custodians of the common good in this regard is a fundamental obligation of the church. And the intelligentsia. The national institutions have to stand. The shift that has been taking place is really in the notion of democracy. Theoretically and practically, this has been changing now for maybe 60, 70 years, dating back to the end of the Second World War. But in postmodern times, really in the 60s, the revolutionary notion of democracy took over. Some of you may be familiar with Antonio Gramsci, who was the founder of the Italian Communist Party. And Gramsci was a little unorthodox and really broke away from Leninism on the notion that the economic takeover of a country or a nation was not the most important thing to allow the socialist revolution to triumph. He believed that what was needed was a cultural takeover of a nation in the West. He didn't think it was possible just to have another coup as the Russians had done the Soviets had done in Russia. He thought that was completely unrealistic. But to take over the culture And then the loss of economic freedom and political freedom would ensue. Gramsci lived from 1891 to 1937, and he argued that Marx's workers' paradise could not be realized as long as Christian culture had a hold on the masses. This was clear for Gramsci. The problem to achieve the deconstruction of Western civilization, of your institutions, of your principles, of the understanding of reality in the West, for him was clearly the Christian church, culture. So he wrote that it could not be realized as long as Christian culture had a hold on the masses. For Gramsci, the number one enemy was the Roman Catholic Church. He lived in Italy. It's a little bit like Ireland. Clearly Catholic. This is a huge problem, and he in fact argued that the real problem for the socialist revolution was not capitalism. The real obstacle was the Catholic Church. So he advised the Marxists, and there's a French journalist, Jean-François Revel, who talked about this, and I quote Revel, that the Marxists must begin by influencing the culture, winning the intellectuals, the teachers, implanting itself in the press, the media, the publishing houses. It's very interesting when you read the notebooks that Gramsci wrote when he was in prison. He equated his plan of attack on the culture to the same strategy that St. Ignatius had used, the Jesuits. He thought it was a brilliant way to affect culture. The education of an intelligentsia who could lead and help be vigilant over the common good. And it was known as the capillary culture, that's what had to be created. And then you could infuse, as he said, into every nook and cranny of the body politic. And this strategy was used by radical leftists in the United States, in Europe, and Latin America. And I argue here. John is right that there is a terrible antagonism these days in democratic discourse. But this is also not by accident. After the Gramscian sort of notion of taking over the culture, hegemony of culture as he called it, by the way, one of his other plans was to infiltrate the churches. If you take over the cultural sector of a democracy, you will soon find that you will lose in the economic sector and the political sector. I always say, every democracy, there are three freedoms that you must protect. Political freedom, economic freedom, and cultural freedom. But the foundation is the cultural freedom. If you lose cultural freedom, for sure you will lose economic and political freedom. They are interlocked and move up and down together. I'll give you an example. In Russia, the loss of economic freedom, or political freedom when private property was abolished, later led on to the loss of religious freedom, the loss of freedom of association, freedom of speech. So all three are moving in this matrix of a real form, a real regime, a real form of politics, which is, in this case, a democratic one. It's not just social issues that are the issue. It's all being altered. Your notion of what a democracy is, your notion of what a constitution is, your notion of what fundamental principles are all being shifted. I call it often a paradigmatic shift in democracy. I think one of the most important speeches given in the 20th century by a pope was the Regensburg Lecture by Pope Benedict XVI. It turned out, because of the reaction that took place afterwards in the Islamic world, that it sort of ended up being a popular sort of impression about it was that it was about Islam. Do you remember that? It had little or nothing to do with Islam. It had 3 lines about this problem of violence, but that was not really the point that he was making. He was talking about a greater problem, that the philosophical crisis in the West is causing a crisis in all kinds of other places. In the case of Regensburg, he was specifically referring to theology. He called it the de-Hellenization of theology. That taking away the cultural achievements of proper philosophical reasoning out of theology was destroying theological thought. But then there comes the practical problem, which is the worship of God detached from reason. Right? This is the theoretical always goes first. Then comes the practical application, which goes bad, because bad praxis comes from bad theory. And he said that detachment from reason in religion creates pathologies of religion, he called them. Think about it. I agree completely with all his analysis, but I think it applies to democracies too. Democracies detached from proper reason cause pathologies of democracy. And this is what we have. They have deconstructed the reason, the sense, the principles, the foundational elements of democracy. And now what you have is a pathology of a democracy. They continue to run the procedure of a democracy, which are free votes, in order to determine what is good and what is just. But this is not how a democracy truly works. And I would like to just sort of try to give you a picture. The notion of a just regime, say even a democratic just regime, and the participation of the people in the project of the common good of the city is a very ancient idea. Right? Democracy, back to Athens. Aristotle was already asking the question, what is the polis? What is the city? And he said the city is the participation of the people in a common understanding of justice. That is what creates the polis. A common understanding of justice, which is what John's talking about. For 1,500 years and more, even in our modern time, to the dates that John was referring to, there was a common understanding of justice. And based on that, you can create a city, you can build a nation. But if you usurp the notion of justice, transform the notion of justice, it is not possible to construct one. It doesn't matter what kind of regime you have. In a proper understanding of a just regime, all aims in a constitution and law have to be sought for the ends of justice, to make justice permanent and more clear in a society. It is not possible to legislate for injustice. And what was justice? That classical definition of justice? To give to each what is owed with a permanent and constant will. Right? We have debts of justice to others. But we must do this on a permanent basis when it's easy to pay the debts of justice and when it's difficult. It is not possible to say that somebody is fit to rule if the aim of law and their pursuit in politics is not to pursue the just. That would disqualify you immediately from a philosophical point of view. Now, John mentioned this, and I want to re-emphasize the point. There are things in a democracy that are political. And the shift in postmodern democracy is that they want to make everything political. That is to say that everything is relative in a democracy. That everything could shift. There's no foundational points that stay fixed. No universal principles by which you could create the body politic. Everything must be moving. Benedict called this the dictatorship of relativism. That's what he meant. If there is no truth, if there are no fixed points, if there's no antecedent notion of justice, you have nothing. You're at the mercy of a dictatorship of the relative. Is it really possible that you imagine yourselves that what constitutes a democracy is a free vote? Think about it. If you ask most people what makes a regime democratic, and they say a free vote, would you say that that is the philosophical essence of what a democracy is? Because it seems to me, I will give you an example. Suppose there had been a referendum before Kristallnacht in Germany, I was saying yesterday in Wexford, that I've been blessed to meet a lot of the people who fought in the resistance in Germany, including the son of Klaus Stauffenberg, who attempted on Hitler in 1944. And we often talked about the resistance, which was a great privilege when I was younger, to really hear from people who were in the resistance what this was like. Think if they had said, we are going to have a referendum on whether the Jewish people should wear a yellow armband with the Star of David. Which side of that referendum would you have been on? You don't know?
The side that would signify that they wouldn't have had the star.
Would you have voted for the Jewish people to wear the yellow armband?
No, because
But here's the thing. Is it a legitimate vote to begin with?
No.
So here's the thing. Accepting the option is presuming that you have the right to decide whether they wear it or not. I reject it as completely illegitimate and illegal and criminal to propose things that violate fundamental rights. It's not within your jurisdiction to vote on fundamental rights, to remove them. It's within your jurisdiction to put in more amendments to make clearer, to enumerate fundamental rights, to protect them from people who want to take them away. But you have absolutely no right by natural law or positive law to remove fundamental rights. You can't vote on that. You'd have to oppose it. You would have to dissent. You potentially would have to go to jail. Civil disobedience. I can't vote on doing that. If it is possible that the essence of democracy is just a free vote, you could have a free vote on anything. I hear sometimes that the travelers are a little bit bothersome in certain parts of Galway. I've heard. And other places. If you really have the authority to vote people out of existence, could you have a referendum on the extinction of travelers? There's no difference here. Governments can't ask for these votes. This is not a legitimate referendum. You have checks and balances in your constitution that have to make sure that proposed referendums are not unconstitutional and contrary to your own constitution. Where are the constitutional lawyers in Ireland that are not disputing, just even trying to call this referendum? Think about it. One of the articles in your constitution says explicitly that private property is an unalienable right, and that it precedes positive law, right? It's sustained by a law that is antecedent to positive law. Could your government call for a referendum to abolish private property? Exactly. Why can't they call for a referendum to remove the right of life to life from a group of people, in this case babies? If you say they can't do private property, you must certainly agree that they cannot remove the fundamental right to life from babies. So you must see first that this is not a democratic referendum at all. This is illicit. It's tyrannical. We're not the Caesars of old who would vote up and down and who lives and who dies at our will and pleasure. You can't ask this question and not have a legal challenge and a public challenge on this matter. So before we go out trying to win referendums, we should realize this is completely illicit. Do you see that? It's worse though. Your constitution also says that only the Oireachtas has the right to raise an army, right? They have, as it were, libertarians usually say it this way, a monopoly over lethal power. I don't like that articulation of it. But what it does mean is that the government can use lethal force licitly. When? Protect you from an English invasion, right? You can't go out there because you can barely have guns in Ireland and defend it. To defend your sovereignty, your territorial national sovereignty. If there's a terrorist attack and they're hostages, they can ordain a SWAT team to go out and use lethal force as necessary. You see that? We have conceded this power in our constitutions. In America, we have capital punishment. So we even concede that a government could put somebody to death who is guilty, never innocent, which would be the case of abortion. The baby is always innocent, under certain circumstances. In your case, it's prohibited, right? But did you concede that the government could share that power to kill with private associations and other individuals? Think about it. If you open up an abortion clinic, the people who are doing business in an abortion clinic require, as a business requirement from your government, from the state, a franchise in lethal power. They need to be able to kill indiscriminately with impunity in order to run a business. Who ever thought that the government could give that power to anybody else? We will give you the power to murder as a business requirement. On top of that, they make money. And nothing happens. That is completely illegal and unconstitutional. The government cannot franchise away lethal power to private individuals and associations. Do you see that? Yes. Think about it. The ability to kill, murder the innocent, is absolutely necessary in the abortion industry, right? In the United States, this is billions of dollars in the abortion industry. We've killed 50 million babies since 1973 in the United States. 50 million. That's like 11 times your population, more. Billions of dollars. But think of other people who would love to have a franchise of lethal power because murder would make their business prosper. Who would that be? The mafia would love to have a franchise of lethal power, right? Drug lords in Colombia. If you would give them a franchise of lethal power, that is, look, you got to run a drug business. You can kill indiscriminately. You don't have to ask us. There doesn't have to be a jury, a trial, witnesses. Nothing will happen to you. Amazing. Like, wouldn't they apply to the government for a little franchise of lethal power? The abortion industry is like a mafia. Think of that. Who would legalize the work of a mafia or drug lords? You'd say that's insane. It's the same thing. They're asking for a franchise to kill. License to kill, and this is not James Bond. License to kill innocent human beings. The problem gets worse. If the government can give a franchise of lethal power to anybody they choose, what is the philosophical criterion that is being used here? If you can legalize murder, as Catherine Saponis said, she said that your Minister of Children, I always say that it seems that she thinks part of her job description is to find ways in which children can be killed. Your Minister of Children. I would love to debate her. She's an American turned Irish in 1995. She was born in Seattle. I know people keep on saying she was born in Canada. I checked it like 3 times. Canada? Seattle. Exactly. She was married in Canada. Was the minister of children saying that without abortion there's no equality, there's no equality, there's discrimination. Your minister of children is obsessed with killing them, having ways to do so. It will corrupt your judiciary. Because if sanctioned by positive law that you can kill the unborn, the judges will start passing sentences on people who are trying to defend the unborn. My good friend Mary Wagner, who's spent now 5 years of her life in jail for counseling women not to have abortions in Canada. And her friend, who spent 11 years now in prison. It will corrupt your police force. I've stood in front of abortion clinics many times, and the police is sitting there waiting and watching crimes being committed with lethal force and do absolutely nothing. They arrest us. It will corrupt the relationship with doctors. A doctor that is in the business of abortion is no longer a doctor. Right? You're getting paid to kill. You're not a doctor anymore. The patient relation with the doctor will be completely usurped. Think about it, the kind of trust that you have with a doctor, that will be gone. You don't know if this guy, before you get there, pregnant, and he's going to deliver your baby, if 1 hour before he just killed the baby from another woman. This is how it's going to be. It will destroy solidarity and cooperation because in society, because you now pay taxes to aid and assist the common good. And there's a moral justification for that. But the moral philosophical basis for the government demanding your taxes, this is not optional, disappears if they start using your money to kill other human beings that are innocent. I don't give you my money so you can go kill other people. But since you subsidize healthcare, and this becomes then a health necessity, you will be paying for the killing indirectly, but it's your money. The government has no money. All the money that the government has is yours. I say that it is morally free not to pay taxes anymore if they're going to use 1 penny to kill another human being. There's no moral justification. If I were an NGO and I ask you for money to help reconstruct Europe, and you find out that I'm using the money to pay for abortions, you could sue me for fraud. This is a fraud. To take the money of the citizens of Ireland to kill innocent human beings is a fraud. I think I have 2 minutes, they're saying. So, I think part of what John was saying was also very true. It's important to think through these problems theoretically, to understand what we're dealing with here. Article after article after article of your Constitution will fall if you allow the most fundamental article, right, the protection of the first right, the right to life, to be gone. There's something very singular about Ireland. I see these liberal elites. I don't call them even intelligentsia because they don't seem that intelligent to me. I read some of them sometimes and they don't seem that bright. But okay, the so-called liberal intelligentsias, progressive intelligentsias in Ireland, trying to shame you into you're not progressive enough because you're the last in the world to get abortion. You should get on with the times. You've been left behind. Progress is staring you in the face with abortion, the brave new world that they propose, the brave new Ireland that John's describing. We have to stop allowing them to shame us so easily. Is there any shame in saying that we are not for murder? It has nothing to do with being Catholic. Even before I was practicing my faith, I was against murder, all types of murder. Are you for the murder of the old woman who's assaulted in her apartment by burglars and murdered? Or are you against that? Are you for the murder of the young people on the streets at the hands of drug dealers? I'm against that. Always have been against that. Abortion is simply another type of murder, right? In theology, we say a species, a kind of murder. It's not some other strange thing. It's the same opposition that we've had against murder all the time. This is just one way in which people get murdered, by a doctor in a mother's womb. I'm against all murder. Is that so unreasonable? I'm against stealing. I don't want stealing legalized and put into the Constitution. Let's make stealing legal. This is an absurd thing. We should be able to shame the opposition that you're even proposing something so barbaric and irrational that you don't even need an explanation to know that it's not acceptable. Do you see that? We need to pray and encourage the political leaders, but more important, the leaders of the church, the cultural leaders, the intelligentsia in this country to step out into the public square and do this job. This is their duty in a democracy. This is not an optional thing, whether I want to or not. I tell priests all the time, putting the prayers for life in your prayers of petition at Mass cannot be the extent of your effort. I mean, I've been a priest for 20 years, and I was in the Soviet Union in the early 90s, and I met people like President Havel many times who fought terrifying things like the Soviet Union. I also knew Lech Walesa and others. Those were dark times. Scary times. Germany was scary. If you stood up for the Jews, you could be incarcerated or killed. What will happen to us? Some paper tiger journalist at the Irish Times will say something. Whoa. I've met bishops who spent 25 years in prison camp in Siberia. I lived with a priest from Albania who was 38 years in prison camp, tortured nearly every day, and continued to be a priest. I met him when he was in his 70s. Tortured for years, decades, by the communists. Cardinal Świątek, who spent 25 years in Siberia, near Kamchatka, in the coal mines, because he was a cardinal of the Catholic Church. He was made a cardinal later by Benedict, but he was a bishop. These people are the people that we should look to. We're afraid of nothing. Who's going to come down banging on our doors to persecute us, take us away? The other side is arming itself for this referendum and this battle. I say we have an obligation to fight this. And if we don't, there will be nothing else that matters. Think about it. If it is licit to kill an innocent person, why wouldn't it then be licit for me to kill myself? Assisted suicide. That's nothing compared to killing someone else. If I get permission to kill someone else, killing myself should be totally fine. You just go down the line. So you're opening doors to unimaginable horrors. And I will just close with this. For years, I fought a late-term abortionist in the United States. His name was Leo Carhart. Celebrated in America. In film, it's the Sundance Film Festival. A movie about Leo Carhart and 3 other late-term abortionists. They only kill children from 6 to 9 months. Babies from 6 to 9. Late-term only. That's where the big money is. $10,000 sometimes for an abortion at 8 months. By his own count, he had killed with his own hands over 20,000 babies in his career. Think about it, 20,000 human beings. This is worse than any Nazi criminal that was hunted down by the Allies after the war. Eichmann didn't kill 20,000 people himself. These are mass murderers. But one day, history will show what they really were. It took time in Germany, too, to show what they had done. This man in the United States, to give you an image of progress, and I tried to get the picture to show it to you, used to take the babies, you know, these are fully developed babies, imagine 6 to 9 months, in bags in Kansas, to a public incinerator. And there are pictures of the babies piled on the ground, and I showed it to some of my colleagues the other day, and the doors of the incinerator open where they're tossing these babies in, 8-month babies. One day the picture came out in a newspaper of this horror, because the taxpayers are paying for public incinerators where Carhart and his minions are burning babies. Literally smokestacks of human flesh in the middle of our communities. So they shut him down. They did not allow him to use the public incinerator because the scandal was so incredible. So what did he do? He built an incinerator inside of his business office, inside of his office, and put 2 vents on the front wall where the smoke was blowing out of human flesh. So he would have the abortions, and then he would burn the baby inside of his office. He had an incinerator. This is your picture of progress. 170,000 Irish women have had abortions since 1980, between 1980 and 2016 in England. Think about it. They could have done it before 1980, of course, right? It was possible, 1967. So let's just round it up to 200,000. That's 5% of your population exterminated, more or less, right? All those rivers of blood will flow in the streets of Dublin and in your cities when abortion on demand is permitted here. It will not be in England anymore. It will be here, in your hospitals and wherever else this takes place. And it will be extremely difficult to fight and stop. We've been fighting this for 41 years in the United States and made almost no progress. You have to convince the younger generations, because they're being indoctrinated in these universities by false academics, philosophers, and teachers of bioethics. But if you don't do this job, nobody will. And if you don't do it now, it will be too late, I assure you. Because you will be the only country to actually insert in your constitution, remove from your constitution, a fundamental right to life. The United States, the people of the United States never voted for abortion. It was a combination of judicial decisions, including Roe v. Wade, 7-2, but we never voted for abortion. And there's no article in the Constitution of the United States that says that abortion is licit. At all. The justices found justification in different amendments that were completely fine. The 9th Amendment, the 5th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, to justify, as one of the justices said, in the penumbra of some of the amendments of the Constitution, we discovered the right to privacy. And under the right to privacy, a woman has a right to commit an abortion, but this is not in our Constitution. What you are doing, no country has ever done. That the people of a nation voted democratically to destroy and exterminate another, or permit the extermination of another group of people. Go find me the country in the West that did this. Most of it has been judicial decisions or parliamentary decisions, but we would have never voted for abortion if we had a referendum. So I close there because I know I'm over my time and happy to take questions. There's so much we could talk about, but I'm grateful to be here. I love Ireland. I think these are serious, serious times. And it's going to be up to us, and hopefully the church, which again will have their voice heard all over Ireland. I encourage and pray and think we should support greatly our bishops and priests. I know there have been difficult times in Ireland, but Mass atones for many things. It's time to get over certain chapters of the Church of Ireland and become the Church in Ireland and become again a voice of reason in this country. And we should show our support for our bishops and for our priests, that we are with you. We are not against you. We are not ashamed of you. We are with you. Even some pro-life groups have thought that having religion and God visible in the public square might be a problem to win referendums. Well, they're not doing so well without that. So I commend you not to be afraid. We'll be happy to argue from reason, because it doesn't require Catholic faith to understand that murder is unjust. But I'm not afraid of my faith. I'm not ashamed of God. I'm not ashamed to pray. Your own constitution says that we owe veneration and worship to God and homage to His name. It's in your constitution. Read your preamble, which starts with an invocation to the Holy Trinity. There's prayers every day at the Oireachtas when it's in session. Okay, thank you for listening.